During her re-election announcement in January, East Baton Rouge Parish Mayor-President Sharon Weston Broome boasted about a decrease in violent crime and a reduction in gun violence across Baton Rouge. At the time, the mayor-president touted a 34% decrease in gun violence over the past 2 years. The mayor-president held up a news article touting a decrease in gun violence nationwide, despite public perception that gun violence was on the rise. It echoes Broome's remarks in May 2023 when addressing crime in Baton Rouge, where she stated, quote, "The average person in Baton Rouge should feel safe." However, since then, crime rates have surged to levels surpassing those of 2021, which marked the city's most violent year on record. Some pundits have drawn parallels between Broome's crime reduction speeches and former President George W. Bush's infamous Mission Accomplished declaration in 2003. Bush famously stood on an aircraft carrier beneath a massive banner reading Mission Accomplished, asserting that major combat operations in Iraq had concluded, despite the war persisting for years thereafter. Broome, along with newly appointed Baton Rouge Police Chief T.J. Morse, have addressed the surge in violence on numerous occasions since January, asserting that contrary to public perception, crime is not spiraling out of control. They emphasize that it is primarily attributed to retaliatory actions among certain groups. The mayor-president and police chief's assertion that crime is being contained to specific areas of the city holds true, particularly concerning homicides. Approximately 80% of the 38 homicides in Baton Rouge this year are concentrated within a triangle bounded approximately by Interstate 110 to Flannery Road between Greenwell Street and Florida Boulevard. This week, we are talking about Baton Rouge's murder triangle, where nearly 80% of homicides are taking place, and some solutions to Baton Rouge's violent streak. This is Louisiana Unfiltered. Welcome back. Well, we are going to dive right in, and joining us for this episode is our executive producer, Daniel Brown. Daniel, we have done some extensive research on the topic of crime, and we keep our own records when it comes to homicides. And so we Unfiltered is at 38. That includes the justified, the negligent. That just includes any death.
Yes.
Where somebody killed somebody. 38. If you compare that to the deadliest year in 2021, yeah, we're only maybe a few days off, but we've surpassed 2021 numbers right now.
It's scary, especially when you consider the time of the year, because historically you have more deaths or murders in the summer months, the heat of the summer, right? You're seeing this now in the winter and early spring, a surge so early. So it's a little concerning, a little alarming about where we go from here, especially if we don't get things under control. And, like you said, we started digging into the problem because we noticed at the end of last year, we started seeing a slow uptick in the murder rate. We had kind of gone last year in 23, it kind of in the fall, kind of took a little dip. It gave everyone a little bit of pause, like, oh, maybe we're on the right track. Maybe some things are starting to work. December started going up. January started going up. And that got us looking at the numbers more closely and analyzing. We spent weeks analyzing the numbers, mapping all the homicides on the map to see like where are they happening. And like you said in the intro, it forms a triangle. And, it really is a murder triangle because 80% of the murders in Baton Rouge are happening in this one specific area.
And I still remember after we pieced everything together, you made this map. and you called and said, oh my God, take a look at this?
It's crazy. Like, even without drawing, like we drew the triangle, but even without drawing it makes like a perfect like pendant on the map. And, you know, I think it's surprising, but not surprising. I think when you look at the area, it is an area that historically has more crime than other parts of Baton Rouge, and there are so many reasons for that. But you know, it's not saying that there isn't crime outside this triangle. It's not saying there's not murders outside this triangle. There are, but the bulk of them are happening in this one specific area.
Let's kind of shift, because last week we just had the coroner come on and his chief criminal investigator, and I guess I should have known this, but it didn't click. But there is a direct correlation between homicides and drugs.
Yeah, and it seems common sense, right? It seems like, yeah, there's common sense. But we talk to current and veteran, you know, narcotics officers, and they all basically told us the same thing, that the area of the triangle is historically where the majority of the drugs are taking place in the city. It's where majority of the investigations have taken place historically in Baton Rouge. There is an area in South Baton Rouge, kind of between downtown and LSU, that also has a drug problem. That's part of a lot of investigations. But this specific area is where a lot of the undercover investigations historically have taken place. Baton Rouge doesn't have a narcotics division right now.
And that's a whole nother subject.
It's a whole nother
itself,
subject.
Because ever since they dismantled the narcotics unit, you could probably go back and correlate that that's when things started.
And we looked at that. So crime was kind of ticking up historically above averages before then. But when that disbanded, we've still have had higher crime rates, higher murder rates in the city. And it kind of goes back, Kiran, there's always been this debate, right? Does Baton Rouge have gangs? There's been some officials, and I know this gets you heated, there's been some officials that say, no, Baton Rouge does not have gangs. You got some that say, yes, Baton Rouge has gangs. I think what I found during our investigation is someone told me this, and it kind of rang an alarm in my head a little bit. I think normal people, think of gangs as being like the Crips and the Bloods, right? Like,
yes.
Like those Hollywood gangs, right? These are not those gangs.
No.
These are
groups of people.
Yes. They are drug lords, if you will, drug masters that are peddling drugs. And the coroner in his investigator last week, Shane, said this really well. I think they articulated this really well. It's turf wars. They're turf war gangs, right?
That's exactly it.
And I think we have to get over what we think of as a gang in our head and really think about what the gangs are today.
They're self-proclaimed gangs.
Correct.
They're young groups of people who are not going out to work. Instead, they're resorting to, let's sell some drugs. But now I don't have to worry about a police officer coming for me.
Correct.
But a police officer is, what you do, have to worry about is another gang member or the turf war. And they're not coming to remove you. They're coming to kill you and get you out of the way.
And what's important, and we didn't go in detail in this in our article, but one of the things that kept coming up in our investigation is something we're kind of working on now is you have these drugs, turf wars going on, and you don't have a narcotics division investigating. So it's almost like police know who they're going after, but they don't know who they're going after like they used to. They don't know the faces and the names. They kind of are, shadows in the night, right? That was kind of one of the quotes that was kind of given to me, which I think is interesting. So you have that going on, and there's really no investigating. There's no policing going on when it comes to directly that problem. And the coroner even said, if you fix the drug problem, you fix the homicide problem.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, why is there a disconnect with the way we're policing, the way we're governing the city with what's going on now? And to be honest, that's not an answer I think we're going to get, because I think there's some denial from the mayor's office about the problem in Baton Rouge, and what's going on.
Well, and even from the DA's office, if we're going to call people
And
out,
I was
I'm going to
gonna
go
say
ahead
the
and
DA,
say it.
yeah.
Hiller does not want to admit we have gangs.
Correct.
But it's funny how you have a district attorney in East Baton Rouge who doesn't want to admit it, but Tony Clayton, the district attorney right across the
One
river,
district over,
will very clearly say, heck yeah, we have gangs.
And he's just prosecuted gangs.
Successfully prosecuted 5 young men who were part of a gang, took them to court for murder all at the exact same time, got life sentences on all 5.
Yeah.
So it's weird, and I guess I do semi-understand. They're afraid that if we put it out, there's the public going to be afraid. But the public's not stupid, and the public has a right to know.
Read our comments. They're not stupid.
They're not. They're not. And that's what upsets me the most, that stop thinking the public is stupid. I, as a reporter, have known for years when your statisticians are telling you, hey, we have this many established gangs. Back in 2013, I remember doing that story with the LSU statistician, and I'm thinking, I thought we don't have gangs.
But again, Kiran, I really think it goes back to that perception of what a gang is. And it's not what it used to be. Like, gangs have evolved just like the rest of us. And I think it's important to say, we are not picking on the mayor's office. We're not picking on Baton Rouge Police Office. I think Baton Rouge Police are actually doing a good job in a lot of areas. And I think the new police chief with his community outreach, not that it wasn't happening before, but he's really kind of elevated that. So I think there's a lot of good things happening. But you're right. There is a disconnect with the justice system in what's happening.
And I'll add to that, I feel there's so much more to it. You have a police department with, 569 police officers only?
Correct.
Okay. That number has actually gone in reverse. It should be so much higher. I remember covering stories years ago when, hey, we are at 698 officers, but we are allotted to have 798. Back then it was, okay, we're 100 short. 100 short from 700. Now we're at 569 officers, yet the population in Baton Rouge, East Baton Rouge Parish, is the largest parish in Louisiana.
Correct.
It's not possible.
And that goes historically to what's happening nationwide with a police shortage, and a lot of it goes back to George Floyd and some of the what happened a few years ago of why we've seen a decrease. Something that former police chief Pat Inglade just talked about with me, and how that's a problem, and we got to figure out a way to fix that problem. But the Baton Rouge Police told us Baton Rouge Police is allotted in their budget 696 officers. They are averaging about 650 officers is their average over the last few years, but they're currently only at 569 officers. So they're still way below even like their average, and it's way below their budget, what they're allowed. And look, Baton Rouge Police has tried a lot of things to lure in the 15% pay increases. They're offering $10,000 hiring bonuses. They're offering all these things, and they're just not able to get it. And Pat Inglade used to say, or he told me that whenever he was kind of chief, and this was several years ago, the academies were like stacked, right? And you can only kind of do 2 academies a year, essentially because of all the training and hours you got to put into it. And it used to be like you had like hundreds of people trying to get in the academy, and you had to whittle it down. So he's like, I had literally the best of the best. Yep. He's like, now you're lucky to get a fraction of that.
People do not want to be police officers anymore, men or women. It's low pay, high risk. Lawsuits are through the roof. So why does anyone want to be a police officer? Why do the parents want their kids to be police officers? That's not a Baton Rouge problem. That's a national problem. And in fact, I'll even add to that. I've also had former police chiefs tell me when Baton Rouge had an academy, you had neighboring agencies, officers coming in from neighboring agencies, and it was like almost a lottery that, I got in, thank God I got in. Now they can't even get enough.
Yeah.
So that's a problem in itself. But then you look at the men and women who are there. There was a time they just felt like they were worn out. There are times.
They still are.
They still are. There are times when officers are working, maybe 2 or 3 men and women are working the entire shift by themselves. That's not possible to patrol an entire district with 2 or 3 people only.
And we had a retired Baton Rouge Police homicide detective tell us as well that, used to be detectives were, investigating like 1 or 2 homicides, and that was like their caseload. And now their caseload is much higher.
Yes.
So they can't even keep up with it. And because what a lot of people don't realize too, and I didn't realize this until he told me that, and it kind of blew my mind, they're not just investigating homicide deaths, they're investigating drug overdoses and all this stuff too. So when you add all that, especially with the fentanyl problem and stuff like that were going on, we talked about, they're just overworked. And it's, and we dug into that problem too. And one of the things that kept popping up is talking about police shortages and all these things. We looked into the governor of Louisiana, Jeff Landry, and he ran as a tough on crime governor. His entire campaign, just about 90% of it, was on crime and addressing the crime problems. He had advertisements. His first ad, period, statewide for a governor was his tough on crime stance and his career as a law enforcement officer to the Attorney General of Louisiana and how he was tough on crime. He had advertisements with victims of crime, parents and brothers and sisters and all these things. He put a face to crime. People really related to that. And
he won by a landslide. Make sure we say
by
that
a landslide.
Part. Huge.
He was the only governor in many years to kind of win the jungle primary where you have all the parties together outright in the first time as a first time, not a returning governor. So that was super interesting. And I think a lot of people anticipated it, but it was still surprising. Even me that I follow politics, I was like surprised that he was able to get to that threshold.
Yep. No need for a runoff.
So that's interesting. So we want to look at it. And look, he's been tough on crime. He had a whole special session dedicated to crime. And he will tell you that a lot of the work they did during that special session, a lot of those bills have not gone into effect yet. Okay. So I'm going to be the devil's advocate for his office and say that. But when you look at what they're doing in New Orleans, and New Orleans has the same staffing issues as BRPD, they have a similar crime rate. Ours is a little higher here in Baton Rouge because we do have a higher population now in New Orleans. But a lot of focus has been put on New Orleans. He has a special state police troop that is in the city. So that's extra officers on the ground, boots on the ground, if you will, in the city, helping NOPD patrol. Obviously, they're hitting up like the Bourbon Streets and the French Quarter area, the touristy areas. So you can actually see police on the corners. And it's that, some of it's that mental part, the visual of it. That's part of it. But they're also there to respond to crimes faster, homicides. They're there to help investigate, another set of eyes, another set of ears, all those things. So there's a lot of attention. And look, there's a lot of reasons for that. It is New Orleans. New Orleans is, Baton Rouge is the capital, but New Orleans is really the heart.
Moneymaker.
It's the moneymaker.
For the whole
You got a
state.
Super Bowl coming up. There's a lot of perceptions about that because you ask, and the governor said this in a speech, you ask anybody where Baton Rouge is and they may not know, but you ask everyone where New Orleans is and they know. So that's a reason why New Orleans get a lot of attention. And I'm not criticizing that, but what I kept thinking and it kind of led to us investigating is like, why is that not happening in Baton Rouge? If we're seeing crime, especially homicides, rise, if you're seeing all these things happen, why are we not being more proactive? Why is the governor not saying majority of these crimes are happening near my house?
Exactly.
Within a 5 or 10 mile radius of my house is this murder triangle that we're talking about.
The governor's mansion is what he's referring to.
The state capitol is right there.
Yep.
Why are we not doing more to protect the capital city of Baton Rouge? Why are we not doing more to get that perception to fix the problem? And he is right. A lot of the problems are the justice system and there's all these things, but you have to start somewhere. So why are we not putting all that we can, all our resources into fixing this problem? And we looked into that and there's no clear-cut answer, but every law enforcement veteran and current law enforcement officer that we've talked to said that a boots on the ground approach works.
It does.
It doesn't solve the problem, but it does work. And it does fix that public perception that
they're out there.
They're out there. And look, I have family in Livingston Parish. I have family in Ascension. a lot of these people do not go to Baton Rouge anymore.
They don't. They go to Hammond. They go to Tangipahoa Parish.
Correct.
They'll even drive out to the Felicianas for a drive, but they're not going to Baton Rouge, despite whatever any official says that Baton Rouge is safe.
And they won't drive through Baton Rouge to get to the Felicianas either.
And I'll be honest with you. The other day I was headed to a shoot, and I was on Interstate 110. The thought crossed my mind because the person in front of me was going extremely slow.
Yeah.
So I passed him up, and the immediate thought in my head was, I'm going to get shot.
Yeah.
Because interstate shootings in Baton Rouge, road rage, is a real thing.
It's frustrating. And I think that's where some of the disconnect is, Kiran, because, look, my family's not stupid. They know the bulk of the murders are happening in certain areas of the city. But you're also looking at shootings in front of the Mall of Louisiana was last year. You're having robberies, car break-ins, like all these things. Like it goes beyond the murder rate.
It does.
It goes beyond like someone dying. It's crime
in general.
And there's a perception, whether officials or elected officials want to admit it or not, that Baton Rouge is not safe.
It's not safe.
There's this public perception, and I think we have to stop ignoring that to fix the problem. Because Baton Rouge is a great city.
It actually really is.
I was born and raised here. I moved away for work for many years. It wasn't until I moved away that I appreciated this place so much. I've lived in other cities. I lived in other states. And there's something special about Baton Rouge in this area. But it's to the point where I don't even want to go to downtown anymore.
Live after 5.
I don't want to go. I don't, and that used to be my favorite thing to do in Baton Rouge.
In fact, you had an incident happen a few months ago that kind of really made you say, I'm done.
I did, yeah. We were downtown, and I was on the sidewalk street and by myself, parking the car, so I was waiting, and a man that I think was like a homeless man was walking by. He came by, and I knew something was off, but it was kind of like, where do you go at this point?
Yeah.
And he asked me for money, and I told him I didn't have any. I was nice, polite. I was like, I'm sorry, I don't have anything. And he got angry and irate at me. Mind you, this is right across the street from Baton Rouge Police's downtown 5th District precinct. And I'm standing on the sidewalk, and he gets mad at me, angry, curses at me, and then he goes to walk away, and he puts his hands like in his pants. And then I'm thinking, what do I do? And then he pulled his hand out. There was nothing in his hands, but he made his fingers like a gun and pointed at me and like fired. And I know it wasn't a gun, and I know it wasn't, but it could have been. And I didn't know that at the time. It freaked me out. Like I was shaken up. And something so trivial, though, just ruins it for you, you know? And it's just kind of like, you know, obviously this was a mentally unstable person, and it just shakes you up. Yep. You know, it makes you not want to go to downtown Baton Rouge.
And you have not been since then.
I haven't been, no.
I think for me, the question that I'm going to ask is going to be that, at what point do we put the politics aside and say, let's do something?
And that's the question that you have to ask. And look, I'm going to be blunt. It's not going to happen this year. It's an election year.
It's an election year. But that's what I'm sick and tired of. We are unfiltered. We're able to say what we want to say. Mm-hmm. But let's stop making it about, oh, well, look at everything I've done. Do you realize the amount of people who call this place home? The sad thing is, though, we're 100% digital media. The comments alone in every story we post, the amount of people who are moving out of Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
They're done.
Or even saying, I can't wait to move out of Baton Rouge.
Yes. They don't want their kids going to LSU or Southern. Mm-hmm. You're starting to lose what makes Baton Rouge, Baton Rouge.
And we saw that in a story we did recently about how Livingston Parish is now the fastest growing parish in the entire state. So, and when you dive into those numbers, it's a lot of people from East Baton Rouge moving to Livingston.
Yep.
You know, and you're seeing that in Ascension Parish as well. You're seeing that in West Baton Rouge Parish. You're seeing it in all these surrounding parishes where people are leaving the city. And you have a lot of people who are considering, they're in private schools in Baton Rouge. Like, do we not do that anymore? Like, do we, especially in Ascension, Livingston Parish, do we put them in public schools because we don't want to deal with the Baton Rouge stuff? And that's not made up. That's like actual people real. Telling us that, Yep.
And in fact, last week when we had the coroner on here, we asked him, is it time to sound the alarm? Because he investigates deaths. And he said it is past time to sound the alarm. That alone is very alarming. At what point does somebody say, we got to do something? And I want to go back to the boots on the ground, because we've spoken to law enforcement officials, and that they're saying the approach, for example, let's take New Orleans. One of the things that New Orleans has started to bring back is that just being able to pull over people if you see something wrong. And that alone will lead to, oh, wait, you have an illegal gun, and then that leads to other charges, but you're getting people off the streets. But it's a domino effect. If you're getting them off the streets, they're going before a judge for the first appearance, but then they're released back out. And
the coroner, I can't remember if it was the coroner or Shane that said this, but until we make it too expensive and too uncomfortable for the criminals to do their business here, it's not going to fix the problem. So policing and police can do all they want to get them off the streets, but they're being right back on. It's not going to fix it. And we've seen this time and time and time again. It was a year or two ago. There was a man that was arrested for basically distributing drugs, and including fentanyl, out of his house in Baton Rouge. And I did check, it is within the murder triangle. He was arrested 5 times before on the very similar to same charges, and he was still on the streets. And it's just like, if fentanyl is such a big problem, if murder is such a big problem, why are we allowing that to happen? And there are flaws in the justice system that need to be fixed, but a lot of the flaws are dealing with the judges that are letting them back out. It's the DA not fully prosecuting them, or cutting deals that we shouldn't be cutting. And it's just ballooning the problem.
And I'll go ahead and say this. We have people who say, why don't you hold the judges accountable? Why don't you hold the DA accountable? We can report a story. A judge is not going to talk to us.
Judge will not talk.
So you have a one-sided story. And that's where we struggle, that, well, it's a one-sided story. I would love to hear from a judge or a former judge as to, why are you not doing this?
And we've tried.
We have tried so hard. So it's easier said than done, that hold them accountable. But yes, it's a revolving door. So this is not just a police problem. It's not just a mayor problem. It is also a judicial problem.
And the judges are elected.
They are elected. And I will say this over and over and over. People forget to go vote. The turnout, this last big election was about 30%. That's terrible. That is unacceptable. Get out there. Go make your voices heard. You have a huge election coming up this year for mayor. You have a huge election coming up when it comes to even the president of the United States. We live in our little bubbles. We live in our homes, and we assume that doesn't faze us. Yes, it does. Even the judges, do your research. Go look up these people before you go make a vote.
Yeah, and look, the president does make a difference, but the real governing happens at the local level.
That's it.
It is your judges, it is your mayors, it is your council person, it is your school board member. They are the real difference makers in communities. They're the ones that really have the biggest impact. All politics is local, right? That's the old saying, and that's so true. And what's frustrating, Kiran, is like, the mayor gets a lot of flack, and I'm not saying it's unwarranted or anything, but I think she's taking on all the flack, and it's not all her. I go back to the governor. If he's going to be tough on crime, be tough on crime everywhere. It's also a problem. Crime is also a problem in Shreveport. That's a major hub for Louisiana too. Why is more not being done there? Right? We care about Baton Rouge because we live here, but you also got to think about that. All these representatives for this area, and that's kind of where we're going to probably go next is like, why are they not doing more to represent? Why are the council people, Metro Council, why are they not doing more? It's not just a mayor problem. It's not just a police chief problem. There are a lot of actors in this that are sitting on the sideline, pointing the finger and doing nothing.
Yep.
And that's important to point out.
It is. And I mean, let's be honest. At this point, we have people who are just getting caught in the crossfire, literally. We just had that happen
this week.
Earlier this week. A bystander was caught in the middle of crossfire, shot and killed. We have kids who are getting killed.
In their bed sleeping.
Yes. That is unacceptable.
And it could happen to anyone.
And that's what people do not realize, that you can be at home in Livingston, in West Baton Rouge, in Ascension. Yeah. Look at Allie Rice.
Yeah.
Dad was asleep in Ascension Parish to get the news that his daughter had just been killed in Baton Rouge.
And look, I want people to also understand we're not just talking about the bad. It is our job, though, to kind of expose these problems and be a voice for these problems. But one of the things that I'm proud of that we're doing, not only here on Louisiana Unfiltered, but also on Unfiltered with Kiran, is we're also trying to provide solutions, solutions to the problem. And I think that a lot of what's being reported are the problems. Like, everyone knows the problems, but like, what are the solutions? Like, we can do it, but we're only one team, one voice, right? Yes. It needs to be a city collective saying, what can we do? And you have the power. Call your representative, call your council person, let them know this is not okay. And that change can't happen that way.
And hold them accountable. When all these promises are made leading up to an election, after they are voted in, hold them accountable. And I mean, from the mayor to the council member to a judge, hold them accountable.
Yeah. Because if we don't do something now, we're going to get into July, August, and September where we historically, and you can look at the numbers every year, even on the less than violent crime years, that's where you see a spike. Yep. And if we don't get the problem under control now, the summer is going to be unbearable.
And in fact, the coroner even made mention of that usually the summer is our peak.
Yeah.
And he said, we're already starting to see, not a peak, but we're starting to see an increase. The other thing is we're starting to see a lot more shootings where it includes multiple people being shot. Last night, or 2 nights ago, prime example, they had a triple shooting.
Yeah. You're
not hearing those as much. And we as media, we struggle. What do we report? Because it's constantly going to be shooting. That's how bad it is in Baton Rouge.
Yeah. There are a lot of shootings that aren't reported because no one died. And it's terrible to say. They're not said that crime wasn't as important, but if we did every shooting, that's all we would cover.
That's all we would cover.
And that's not an exaggeration.
It's not. I mean, we literally sit there with a photographer and question, do we send him here? Mm-hmm. And now where? And in fact, for our photographer, I'll even say this, he's out covering a shooting scene 2 streets over. He hears multiple shots fired. Well, now his safety too, and told him to get out of there.
Yeah.
But that's a reality.
It's a reality.
It's scary. It's sad. And sadly, that is the reality that we are living in Baton Rouge. We delved into this triangle pretty in depth. There's a map that shows it, and we're at 38 homicides for this year. Again, we are including in that number the justified homicide that happened earlier this week. We have a negligent homicide in there as well. But again, a homicide is the killing of a human being by another human being. So we're counting all of it. And comparing that to 2021, by April 18th, you had the 38th homicide. Today is also April 18th. And we're at 38. We're tied with 2021. 2021 was the deadliest year for Baton Rouge.
And we keep going back to that year because it was the deadliest and because you have some historical reference there with that year. So that's kind of like the year that's going to be recorded, right? Unless this year, kind of tops that, which we hope it doesn't.
Yep. Well, we thank you guys for joining us for this episode of Louisiana Unfiltered. We kind of hope that we're able to stress to you how important it is to hold your elected officials accountable, that you have that right. You put them in office, and collectively, we all do have a very, very, very loud voice. So make your voices heard, make your voices count. We thank you for joining us for this episode of Louisiana Unfiltered. We will see you next time.